Hello there, everyone. I'm Gage LaPierre, and I'm pretty content right now. Over here at Bellridge, Longleaf Environmental Management Area, and it's about a 40-minute drive northwest of Gainesville, Florida. And Bellridge, Longleaf Environmental Management Area, it's about 300 acres, and it consists entirely of Sandhill community. So, what is Sandhill community? And how do I know that's what I'm in right now? Well, for starters, let's go back to one of those really important abiotic factors that we talked about earlier in the lectures in this class that you just can't get away from no matter where you go. You got to know what you're standing on, and that's the soil. So the soil here and in Sandhill communities are what's known as an entisol. And an entisol is, it's kind of a fancy way of saying that there's no horizon development, and that just means it's kind of all just one thing. And here, that one thing is just sand. So from where I'm standing, and probably, more than 5 feet down, is nothing but sand. So why is that? Well, why is this area and other sandhill communities, why are they just 5 feet of sand or more? Why is that the soil profile in those areas? Well, remember back from some of the earlier lectures when we talked about in Florida, it was only 5 million years ago when most of the state kind of emerged from higher sea levels. And before that time, and even during that time for quite a while, Florida was existing as barrier islands, archipelagos, and many of these sandhill communities were, islands. So today, we're far inland, and these are kind of what we think are a remnant of those earlier days when this landscape was a lot closer to coastlines than it is now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and obviously a lot of the plants and the animals here are really well adapted for these xeric and dry conditions. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit, but before I forget, let's just kind of make some general observations while we're out here. So the first thing that you kind of notice is it's really open. It's not what you might think of as being forest. It's a little bit more closer to what some people consider a savanna. And just as a general observation, the trees here, the density of the trees isn't that high. There's not a whole lot of shrubs. And when we kind of walk in here, and I'll take us in some spots later, we're seeing mostly grasses. And it's not just one grass, although it may look like one grass. There's actually several grasses out here that contribute to this really diverse understory. There's also quite a few different forbs and legumes that make up it. So why is that? So why is this area made up of so many different grasses and forbs, and why is the overstory so sparse? Why aren't there more trees here? Well, again, I mean, when we look back earlier in our class, and we kind of mentioned another really important abiotic factor or disturbance that maintains these systems, this community, in much of Florida and the Southeast, is fire. So, fire in the past would have occurred on average. It would have occurred sporadically, but it would have occurred on average every 1 to 3 years in a community like this, a sandhill community. And, prior to human influence, these fires would have been lit by lightning, through lightning strikes. And in the past, fires would have occurred during times that would have been really conducive for fires to spread. And that would have been in these time periods when this transition period between dry and wet seasons, which is when we see a lot of wildfires in Florida. So without fire in these sandhill communities, it wouldn't really look like this. You would start to see a lot more shrubs. You would start to see a lot more trees. And over time, those areas would transition pretty quickly into a dominance of hardwood species made up primarily of laurel oak and sand live oak. So a lot of the tree species that we see out here very well might disappear in place of those, and a lot of the grasses and the forbs, this diverse open understory that we're seeing, that would also disappear.
So keeping in mind that positive feedback cycle between vegetation and fire in sandhill communities, let's talk about the overstory. So the overstory in sandhill communities is often dominated by longleaf pine. Longleaf pine is an incredibly important and interesting species all across the southeast for a lot of different reasons. But some of the reasons for that is first, and one of its primary effects in that positive feedback cycle is longleaf pine provides a lot of needle cast just in 1 year, especially mature trees, which provides ample fuel for fires to occur in sandhill and upland pine communities. Something else that's important about longleaf pine is it provides habitat for certain species like fox squirrels and red-cockaded woodpeckers. In the past, longleaf pine, there's estimates of certain trees living over 500 years, so it's an incredibly long-lived species. And in the past, longleaf pine was also an incredibly important species commercially, especially in the late and early 19th and 20th centuries. Other overstory species in sandhill communities include a wide variety of oaks. Oaks in sandhill communities and other communities across Florida and the southeast are sometimes classified and divided between pyrophilic oaks and non-pyrophilic oaks. Pyrophilic generally means this ability in which fire favorably acts on for some species rather than others, And being pyrophilic simply means that some species require fire or necessitate fire in order to complete their life cycle or to maintain health and vigor. So some of the other pyrophilic oaks that occur within sandhill communities include oaks like bluejack oak and sand post oak, both of which have this thick bark that allows it to be protected during these frequent fires in sandhill communities. Another interesting pyrophilic oak within sandhill communities is turkey oak. Turkey oak is a definitive indicator on the landscape of dry and xeric conditions, and it's also important to note that its leaves burn hotter and faster than that of longleaf pine needles. So in the case of non-pyrophilic oak species, this includes species like laurel oak. Laurel oak can occur within sandhill communities, but they often occur within areas known as fire shadows. Fire shadows includes certain minor slopes and depressions that occur within sandhill communities. In these fire shadows, fire is less likely to burn as intensely or at all within those areas, which favors the development of species like laurel oak, which is not tolerant to frequent fire regimes. Another non-pyrophilic oak species is sand live oak. Sand live oak can occur within sandhill community matrix, and what's interesting about it is, as a way of adapting to this frequent fire community, it often forms what's called a oak dome. Now this takes many years to form, but what's interesting about it is we think that this is a strategy in which sand live oak is able to survive in this frequent fire community. What happens within this oak dome is that a large accumulation of litter occurs, and this large accumulation of litter often forms into duff, and duff holds on to moisture for longer periods of time than if there were no leaf litter there. So even in these dry periods where fires are more likely to occur, within these oak domes, the intensity of the fire or the possibility of fire going through is a lot more diminished, and over time you see larger individuals within the middle of the dome and smaller individuals, new cohorts, forming on the outer perimeter. So it's a very unique adaptation. Also, it's important to note sand live oak is not the same as live oak, which is Quercus virginiana. So as I mentioned earlier, the understory in sandhill communities is very open. It has a diverse and rich range of different grasses and forbs. Some of these different grasses and forbs that you'll see at Bellridge and other places include species like Liatris, Pidiopsis, wiregrass, Indian lopsided grass, lovegrass, Carphephorus, goldenrod, and I could honestly go on and on with the incredible rich range of forb and grass species that you can find in sandhill communities. It's also important to note that in sandhill communities there are also a good diversity in shrubs, even though they are not typically dominant. Some of these shrubs include species like gopher apple, pawpaw, persimmon, and not sure if you always want to consider that a shrub in sandhill systems, but generally they never get too big. And also runner oak, of which there are many different species, and it's a unique oak species that grows almost entirely underground. So as I mentioned earlier, fire can have
a dramatic influence on both the composition and the structure of sandhill communities, as well as other Florida communities too. It's also important to know that certain attributes of fire, such as the seasonal timing of fire and the frequency of fire, can influence the composition of sandhill communities. Namely, as it concerns the flowering and the fecundity of forb and grass species. Wiregrass, which is a dominant species in sandhill communities, is an excellent example of this. Wiregrass is known to only flower and go to seed, essentially, after what is known as growing season burns. Growing season burns in Florida is typically late spring to summer months. Another general rule of thumb as it regards fire frequency and its effects on sandhill communities, as well as certain other communities in Florida, is that higher fire frequency generally leads to a reduction in shrub and tree density, whereas in a lower fire frequency, meaning a longer fire interval, leads to a increase in shrub and tree density.
Hey there, everyone. So today we're over here at Oleno State Park. Oleno State Park is about a 25 minute drive north of Gainesville, Florida. It is an awesome place. If you haven't been, go check it out. Oleno is composed of a lot of different plant communities, but one of the ones that we're here today to see is upland pine communities. So as we've talked about, upland pine communities are a little different than sandhill. Generally, upland pine communities are found on soil profiles that are classified as a ultisol. And we've talked a lot about ultisols in previous videos, mainly the mixed hardwood video. But something that's important to note, the presence of clay throughout the profile in ultisols allows for generally a very different composition of understory and overstory species to occur on a given site. So in comparison to sandhill, which is an entisol. So with that said, let's get into it. So the overstory here at Oleno State Park and in upland pine communities, one big indicator that's different than sandhill is southern red oaks. So southern red oaks can grow very large, and they generally thrive on these areas where there is this presence of clay. We're also seeing a scattered mix of post oaks and dogwoods. Another difference between sandhill and upland pine communities is in the understory. The understory in sandhill, as I mentioned earlier, is composed pretty heavily of wiregrass, and here at Oleno State Park and in upland pine communities, you often see a little bit more dominance of some of these andropogon species and Indian lopsided grass. And that's what we're seeing here right now. Something else that is unique to both upland pine and sandhill communities in Florida is this presence of gopher tortoises. And we haven't really talked a lot about animals in a lot of these videos, but this is just a pretty unique case here. Gopher tortoises are considered and known as a keystone species and a ecosystem engineer. So pretty fancy titles for such a modest species, but nonetheless, they play an incredible role here in both of these communities by creating these burrows, which allows for not just themselves to live in, but a lot of other species. And without them, you would start to see a change in these communities.